G'day, May 40 here. So I grew up in a very religious household as a Seventh-day Adventist, and I knew a lot of religious people, and they took a great deal of pride often in being otherworldly, not understanding how this world works. And it's very common to be far too heavenly minded to be much earthly good. It's very easy to be so intoxicated by God and by religion and by religious text that you're not particularly effective or helpful in the real world, but you're much more on the helpless side of things. So it is a mitzvah. It is a great thing to understand how the real world works. And towards that end, I read a terrific book that just came out this year. It's called All the Worst Humans: How I Made News for Dictators, Tycoons, and Politicians. It's by a publicity operative. And in high school, Phil Elwood said, I traveled to universities around the nation, well, in college, to argue about what policies would lead to nuclear war. Rapid-fire reading of news clips scored points in a round. So did biting insults lodged at your opponent in an attempt to trap them in a rhetorical mishap. You won by manipulating the news and calling it evidence to advance your argument. I won a lot. And he found that on Capitol Hill, it was a real-world version of debate team. Everyone talks fast, and there are winners, losers, and nukes. So my goal is to try to elucidate how the world works. I aim for truth. I optimize for truth. I don't optimize for excitement or attention-seeking or for profit. And this bloke, Phil Elwood, he got into trouble again and again and again because he had a cocaine habit, and he was an alcoholic, and he behaved terribly in many different places. He got kicked out of one university, George Washington University in D.C., thought I'd have to return home, but instead he got promoted. Why did he get promoted? Because people liked him, right? He was working for Senator Pat Moynihan, an alcoholic. His office made one call, and Phil Elwood got hired as a legislative correspondent for the senior senator from Michigan, Carl Levin, and the drinking and the boozing and the drugs just continued. And how did he get away with so much bad behavior? He was good at what he did, and he was incredibly likable. And so towards the end of my first year with Carl Levin, the chief of staff calls me into his office. I strongly suggest you get a college degree. He says, George Washington's off the table. He got kicked out of there. But what about Georgetown? So the bloke only had a high school C average. You'd think that Georgetown would be off the table too. But no, Carl Levin has considerable influence with the university. One letter from the senator, and he's accepted as a transfer student, right? This is how the world works, or much of the world works. It's not exactly a meritocracy. You can have the most merit of any employee, but if you create some kind of liability for your employer, you'll be fired, while relatively mediocre employees will continue year after year after year. And so Phil Elwood was watching the Enron bloodbath, and he was wondering, the people who took the witness stand, who helped them, who prepped them, whoever it was. Where was the consistent messaging? Why weren't they expecting these questions? Why aren't they repeating the same 5 lines over and over and over? Why are they just giving easy sound bites to the senator and to the media? And so he started prepping clients to appear on cable news, and he found that his words that he'd prepared for his clients would become legitimate in real time because he's saying them on cable news. He's talking about a soldier, John Powers, who was a subject of a documentary, and he got him on CNN, and he got the guy just saying certain talking points over and over and over again. So if a PR person appears on TV, it usually means they've messed up. But you'll find CNN, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS broadcasting your message to millions of Americans. So it's not your job as a publicist to manipulate public opinion. Your job is to get gatekeepers like CNN and the New York Times to do it for you. And then once your story has ink, or once your story gets on CNN, it becomes real. So a whole conversation and a way of thinking that didn't exist moments before, right? You create it because you have something the reporters always need: access to inside information, right? I could get access to anyone in the world if I simply had sufficiently valuable information. So as a publicist, you may not think that they have access to all sorts of great information. They do, right? That's their commodity. It's in his world is the world's most valuable currency. The media demands constant fuel, and he feeds information to reporters, and he tries to figure out how much he can manipulate them. Right? I feel as if I put on a pair of night vision goggles that reveal the hidden machines powering the world. I begin to see levers I can pull. The adrenaline that spikes feels stronger than any line of cocaine. So one of his clients is the U.S. Tuna Foundation, which tries to get pregnant women to eat more tuna. And so they pay off academics to argue that a certain form of molecular mercury was just too large to cross into the blood-brain barrier. And so they got these foundations, the National Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition, to say that women of childbearing age should eat at least 12 ounces of seafood per week. They got the New York Times to finally expose the whole affair. So they were caught by the New York Times. Industry, money, fans debate on fish. So he was working for a foundation that was trying to prep women to eat all sorts of things that were really terrible for them.
I think the Trump administration and Tom Homan has gotten it right. Is we have to enforce our laws. That's step one in securing the border.
Well, securing the border, obviously a key part of the election and something that now President-elect Trump campaigned on every stop. If you look at the encounters, not only in the southern border, but in the northern border, look at this, the Biden administration, you can have under Trump there, 2.4 million, under Biden, 8.5 million. That doesn't count the gotaways that they know got away in those encounters. Then look at the northern border, 13,000 to 38,831. More about that in a second, but let me bring in the panel. Byron York, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Molly Hemingway, editor-in-chief at The Federalist, and Democratic campaign consultant Kevin Walling. Molly, you heard Tom Homan touring there with Texas Governor Greg Abbott, clearly laying the groundwork for what's going to happen in the panel. January 20th, or the hours after the inauguration.
Well, one of the interesting things about those numbers you just showed was that the surge in border crossings, illegal border crossings, happened as soon as President Biden won his election in 2020. So for the months prior to him even assuming office, a lot of border crossings happened on the theory that there was a new person in charge and he was going to be much more friendly toward illegal border crossings. And we have seen the results, and those numbers really tell us what those results are. So we're seeing a little bit of a reverse here with this well in advance of the, I think we have 60 days before the Trump administration officially takes over. But people understand that there will be radical changes in our border policies, and the countries that border ours are getting ready for how they will deal with that new administration, which will be so much less friendly to what they did to enable some of these illegal border crossings as well.
Yeah, to that point, Byron, last night we talked about the threat on Truth Social from the president-elect about 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, 10% in increase of Chinese tariffs. If they don't stop the illegal immigrants coming across and the flow of fentanyl into the country, a lot of people said, well, what's the deal with the northern border? If you look at the Chief Patrol Agent, Robert Garcia, from the northern border sector on apprehensions, this is October 2nd. Border Patrol agents in Swanton sector have apprehended more than 19,222 subjects from 97 different countries since October 1st, 2023, which is more than its last 17 fiscal years combined. Canada basically has not secured that border, and that's Vermont, New Hampshire, New York. There was a call with Trudeau, the Prime Minister, in the wake of that tariff threat, and between the President-elect and the Prime Minister. And they said that it was a successful call, a good call to talk about the way forward. But that threat of those tariffs, there's something behind that as far as numbers.
Absolutely, and Justin Trudeau has actually said in recent times that Canada has to tighten its border policies. It just has to do it. And he seemed much more accommodating toward the Trump tariff threat than Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, who seemed kind of belligerent in responding to it, suggesting they might not do anything at all and hope that the tariffs would damage the United States economically. But, internally, what the administration is going to do is really pretty clear. They've made it really clear. They're between 1.3, 1.6 million people in the United States illegally. They've received full due process and have received final orders of deportation from an immigration judge. They're going to go after, the Trump administration is going to go after those people. By any definition of the term, that's going to be a mass deportation, but these are people who've received full American legal due process, and that's where they're going to start.
Kevin, here's some Democratic leaders saying they're going to stand in the way of some of this.
If the Trump administration requests it, would the Massachusetts State Police assist in mass deportations?
No, absolutely not.
Trump's new border czar, Tom Homan, has said that he is willing to arrest leaders like yourself for standing in the way of these policies that they want to enact. Would you be willing to go to jail for these things?
Yeah, I'm not afraid of that. And I'm also not seeking that. I think the goal is we want to be able to negotiate with reasonable people.
Absolutely zero correlation between what people say they are afraid of and what they are really afraid of.
What do you think, Kevin?
Well, listen, we've seen this process play out during Trump's first term in office with some of these threats going after big city mayors, Democratic governors. I suspect we'll see a lot of this end up in litigation over these next couple of months after the Trump team comes in. There'll be fights over funding. I think one of the main concerns from these Democrats that I hear is the fact of reallocating police resources, national security resources, towards this deportation effect. Taking cops off the street and reallocating them to become ICE agents is something that Democrats certainly in these cities are not interested in.
I want to go to the Middle East situation. Obviously, we have the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah with Lebanon. The U.S. helped negotiate that. And I had the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. on to talk about that, but also talked about President Biden mentioning the possibility of a Israel-Saudi normalization deal before the end of the Biden administration. Take a listen. In the Rose Garden today, President Biden, Ambassador, talked about a possible Israel-Saudi normalization, the enhancement of the Abraham Accords, suggesting that maybe possibly it happens before the end of the Biden administration. Is that possible?
The window for such a deal is still open. The Saudis have some requirements, things that they need politically. And I'm hopeful that this could be done.
So if you were to put a number on that, on chances, what would you put it at?
I'll be very careful, and but I would say 50-50.
Wasn't exactly Canada Casino, Molly, but the fact that he put it at 50-50 even is interesting, considering the fact that probably the president-elect would like to see that deal come after January 20th.
Well, I think what the president-elect really wants is that deal, period. And I imagine that a lot of Americans wish that the Biden administration had followed up on that foreign policy approach that the Trump administration had taken in the Middle East, which was turning more to Saudi Arabia. Instead, the Biden administration returned to the Obama era of really privileging Iran. It's been a disaster. The proxies that work with Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas, have caused so many troubles, and it's nice that the Biden administration is finally trying.
Okay, so Phil Elwood has written just absolutely delicious book about his time working for the bad guys. Here he is interviewed on the Jordan Harbinger show.
What was/is? I have was, but I guess is, to make some of the worst people on earth seem not only palatable, but and frankly help them get their way, kind of regardless of how tasteless or possibly even illegal. Is it safe to say illegal that their agenda is? It's not illegal, maybe, but it's quite distasteful.
You know, I promised my wife that I'd stay away from saying what's legal and illegal.
Is your wife also your lawyer?
My lawyer is my lawyer. My wife is my wife, and both of them have veto power over anything I do.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, as a lawyer, not your lawyer, probably shouldn't say all the illegal things that you've done on any podcast.
Yeah, we go with words like questionable.
Questionable is a good one. I should have thrown that in there.
That's definitely the way to go. But no, I don't any longer work for dictators. I won't work against democracy, and I won't break the law.
It's a low bar. It's a low bar.
Well, you know, we're working on it. Every life is a work in progress.
All right, we'll back up and start a little earlier.
So he was an alcoholic and a bit of a drug fiend all through the days that he writes about in this new book.
So you dropped out of college. Can you tell me why?
Yeah, I developed a bit of a cocaine problem.
Gotcha.
When I was about 20 years old. So, see, the way I
So there are people with cocaine problems and with alcohol problems who could be incredibly high functioning. So as a Seventh-day Adventist growing up, I had this naive view that if people drank too much or drugged, that they'd be absolutely useless. Well, the world is a more complicated place than that. So he's got a great breakdown here. PR firms employ two types of people, bureaucrats and operatives. Bureaucrats are the accountants, the conference call leaders, the digital paper pushers. Operatives infect newsrooms. Core reporters do whatever it takes to get ink. I've always been an operative. If you make one friend inside a newsroom, you can get them to introduce you to their colleagues. You can infect that newsroom. All right, so that is a good reminder not to be overly or carelessly helpful, right? You make one friend and then they want you to introduce them to your coworkers, not necessarily in your best interest. The outside world is a much more complicated and dangerous place than we consciously think about most of the time. So I admit I err in the opposite direction. I don't tend to bring people together, right? I should do a lot more bringing people together than I actually do. But to just be super helpful, just bringing people together willy-nilly, is definitely not in your best interests. So talks about the pull that he has over reporters. They know I have something juicy. They know I have an exclusive. They build their careers, right, off exclusive scoops, and I do my job to spin for a client. So I am understanding better every day how influence works and how my influence is growing, and his influence and power grows in the proportion that he has valuable information and he dispenses it with care in his own and his client's advantage. So I didn't know this. The PR industry is worth $130 billion. The best journalists in the world aren't always breaking stories because of their dogged reporting skills. They're breaking them because they rely on people like me to feed them exclusive scoops. Most of the big stories I have broken have been because other people have given them to me. Now, they've only given them to me usually because I've been so dogged in the pursuit of stories that I developed a reputation as someone who would break news. We use journalists to do our clients' bidding, and then the public reads their stories and believes them that they're coming from a trusted news source and not a corporate bagman. And we have journalists outnumbered. 300,000 people are employed by the PR industry in the US compared to 40,000 journalists. So you read something in the New York Times, you see something on CNN, and you think it's got the imprimatur of these prestigious news organizations. But often, much of the time, what has happened is that some canny publicist has cracked the code and is advancing their client's interest, and the journalists get to advance their interest in having an exclusive, but there is a quid pro quo that's operating. I engage in insider trading with the media on a regular basis. I use a group of a dozen journalists to field test ideas. I'll call a journalist, float a strategy by them that has not been given to the client. It's always positioned as, what if, hypothetically, my client decides to do X? Would that be newsworthy? And he goes to work for a publicist who worked for the Beatles, Peter Brown. And he makes this observation about Peter Brown. He's completely comfortable with how the world really works and his place in it. He understands the hidden machinery behind it all. He knows how to operate the hidden machinery. He understands that the most important thing of all is how you look while you're doing it, how you appear. He told me, you can't just do a good job. You also have to appear to do a good job, and that's public relations. If you can do that, then you can do whatever you want, and there won't be any consequences. So this publicist, Peter Brown, would represent all sorts of dictators, and yet all the elite media, including Barbara Walters, would still want to come to his Christmas parties. Then he has a friend who says, never let anyone tell you Americans don't use the metric system. We measure our bullets in millimeters and our drugs in grams. Have you seen the new TV series, Landman? I mean, this is just, it's a terrific, absolutely compelling, frequently hilarious drama. Is created by Taylor Sheridan, same guy behind Yellowstone. I watched my first episode last night based on a recommendation from John Podhoretz, and I think that's excellent. Okay, back to all the worst humans, how I made news for dictators. During media training, PR operatives learned that every story has three parts: a villain, a victim, and a vindicator. So he tells one true story where there was a wife married to a man who beat her, and George came to the door, her friend, and he killed her husband. So in the PR business, we try to convert a villain into a vindicator or a victim as fast as possible. And that's what this hometown did when they found George not guilty without a trial, right? They made him the hero, He was the vindicator of the battered woman. And the deceased drunk, right, he was switched from a murder victim to a wife beater who deserved to die. He became a villain. Every story needs a villain. Show me a good story without a villain. One of this bloke's clients was Muammar Gaddafi. And he came to speak at the UN General Assembly around 2005. And he notes that in public relations, we call attention to an inflection point where we try to create alternative futures for our clients. We try to capitalize on an inflection point, a critical moment when the timeline can skew towards something new and positive for the clients. So Gaddafi's TV speech in front of world leaders had the potential to erase decades of bad press and negative public perception. And you bring your client out, reborn, rebranded, and it's as good as washing them in holy water. So everyone, large and small, faces an inflection point. Some you can create, some are created for you. You've screwed up royally, but in every crisis is a golden opportunity, right? If the client lights their own house on fire, you can be sure that you can get the press to blame outdated fire codes. So I tell clients, don't be a hero. Always work to find a better villain. And that's how much of politics in particular and the news business in general works, right? Always try to switch the blame on someone who is a more compelling villain. And this is the author of this compelling book, Phil Elwood.
I like to look at this. The early part of my life is in kind of two ways. So there's the Instagram way or the LinkedIn way, and then there's the reality of the situation.
Right.
So if you look at
Right. So people are not the way they present themselves on Instagram.
my LinkedIn profile, it says that by the age of 24, I held degrees from both Georgetown and the London School of Economics, and also worked for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the chairman of the Finance Committee, and Senator Carl Levin, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. In reality, at the age of 20, I dropped out of college because of a drug problem and moved to D.C. to dry out. I don't know how much you know about D.C., but that's not exactly the place to do it. But did successfully kick the drug issue and interned for Senator Moynihan, and their office helped me get into George Washington University, a pretty good school in D.C.
Yeah.
I was promptly thrown out after I drunkenly fell through the window of Gelman Library at GW one afternoon, and Moynihan was retiring, so he couldn't give me a job in his office, so he leaned on Carl Levin's office. They were
Right. You can get away with so much at work and in life if people like you and if you are useful. Right. Let's get some wisdom here from Laura
I want
Ingram.
to thank God that Oprah is going to somehow squeak by this holiday season with the paltry payday her production company made from Kamala's campaign. Poor baby. After all, she's such a political savant.
We don't get to sit this one out. If we don't show up tomorrow, it is entirely possible that we will not have the opportunity to ever cast a ballot again.
And thank the good Lord for the voting public who put Donald Trump over the top and who are still happy with their choice. A new Emerson poll shows 54% of Americans have a favorable view of Donald Trump now. That is a record high for him. Now, the list of what we should be grateful for goes on and on. Now, remember, some of the so-called political experts warned that candidate Trump should stick to the economy and the border and stay away from the culture war issues. Well, as usual, Trump relied on his gut and he ignored their advice.
We will get critical race theory and transgender insanity the hell out of our schools. We will keep men out of women's sports. That's like a no-brainer.
And it turns out we can be very thankful that it looks like Trump broke woke. The largest retailer in the United States is dumping its...
Yeah, Trump probably lies more than any other president of which I can remember, but he also tells more truth than any other president that I can remember.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion charade.
Walmart is pulling back on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Why the changes?
What we're trying to do is to ensure that every customer, every associate feels welcome here to shop and to feel like they belong. And we're going to continue to make the best decisions we can that makes everyone, our customers, our associates, feel like this is an environment they can shop in and thrive in.
All right, that's a really long-winded way of saying we're listening to our consumers now who think woke is a joke. Trump doesn't just know how to read the room, people. He reads the country. Case in point, his announcement yesterday that he's planning significant tariffs to crack down on fentanyl and other border-related issues. Thank God. Now, remember, tariffs are to free trade absolutists what sunshine is to vampires. But real people see their utility and the leverage that tariffs provide. According to that same CBS News poll, 52% of Americans support using tariffs on imported goods.
Okay, I keep an eye on the news as I discuss this book, All the World's Worst Humans by Phil Elwood. And he discussed how PR pros invest a great deal of time and effort to bring hit pieces to fruition. So few things motivate people more than hatred or rage against enemies. So usually clients want to see a hit piece on their primary competitor. And Walmart did this. They started all these nonprofit foundations that publicly appeared to stand for making the world a better place, but that wasn't really what was going on. They were firing up all these attacks on their biggest competitor, Amazon. And they just put out a stream of content hitting Amazon until finally this was all exposed in the Wall Street Journal. And then the BLJ publicity firm that Phil Elwood worked for sent Vogue journalist Joan Juliet Buck to Damascus in 2011 to feature the client's wife. So the client is Asma al-Assad. The client is the dictator of Syria, Assad, and his wife is Asma. And so the publicist calls his old friend Anna Wintour, and they put her on the cover of Vogue. Power is the theme. And they used the wife of the Syrian President dictator Bashar al-Assad to try to strengthen the relationship between the United States and Syria. First Lady is always more popular than the president. She can make her husband look good by association. The Vogue story runs under the title, A Rose in the Desert. When I pick up a copy of the glossy magazine, I'm gobsmacked by the first line of the piece. Asma al-Assad is glamorous, young, and very chic, the freshest and most magnetic of first ladies, the writer gushes. The piece describes her as breezy and fun, calls Syria a secular country where women earn as much as men. The Muslim veil is forbidden in universities. It's a place without bombings, unrest, or kidnappings. The piece reads like the reporter spent a few days with Gwyneth Paltrow. Asma al-Assad empties a box of fondue mix into a saucepan for lunch. The household is run on wildly democratic principles. It's rare that you send a journalist out on a propaganda tour and they actually print the propaganda. The Vogue writer says that Mrs. al-Assad likely has a killer IQ. Poor choice of words when describing a dictator's wife. It quotes the president, the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, saying he became an eye surgeon because there is very little blood. Vogue publishes photos of Assad playing with his children. He's dressed like an American president in jeans and a gray fleece. And Phil Elwood says part of his strategy working with reporters is to express his agenda right up front. Rule one, don't believe the lie that any press is good press, right? A lot of press is terrible for you. Don't repeat the negative. The only quote that you probably remember from Richard Nixon is him saying, I am not a crook. So Nixon repeated the negative. The first thing in media training we teach clients to avoid doing. If someone asks you how long you've been beating your wife, you don't say, I'm not a wife beater. You say, I am a good man. Rule 3, never wrestle with a pig in feces. Two things will happen. You'll be covered in feces and the pig will like it. Never get down and fight with an opponent who is beneath you. Rule 4, don't kick someone when they are up. It's an old saying in Washington. It's too much work to attack a strong opponent. Know your place, right? When people are on top, don't fight them.
They were across the hall in the Russell Senate office building to hire me.
Why did he do that for you? Because
I was a good intern.
Okay. Because getting thrown, dropping out of college, joining the office, and then getting thrown out of a college they get you into because you fell through a window, but through negligence, right?
Right.
It's like, you must have been a really good intern.
I was well liked.
Yikes.
I was well liked.
Good. Well, that seems to be your superpower, I suppose.
Getting to know people and getting to trust people and getting people to trust you is a skill.
You told me earlier that my job isn't to manipulate the narrative. My job is to get media gatekeepers like CNN to do it for me. Right. So, and it's not just CNN, right? What does this mean? Because it's kind of a damning indictment of media when it's like, oh, I can just get these guys to do dishonest stuff.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the purpose of this book was not to increase cynicism or skepticism, but rather to increase media literacy.
Good.
And I want people to understand how the news is made. But the important part of that sentiment is that the media is just that. They're just a thing in between. I'm not terribly interested in getting a reporter to write a story unless it does something kinetically out in the world. So you do a story in order to punish.
So why don't you just create a story that goes viral? Well, no one really knows how to do that. All right. Even the greatest publicists have no idea how to make anything go viral. So engineering a viral moment is like choreographing an earthquake. If it happens, it's a shock, and it usually causes damage. Depending on the disposition of the engagement, attention to the wrong aspect of a narrative can be a self-inflicted wound. A lot of PR firms are extremely interested in creating social media campaigns and influencer outreach. My experience, you win the mainstream media and the dog wags the tail. So after Trump's victory, there's a lot of discussion about how now independent media, the non-mainstream media, is ascendant. Well, usually the social media mob follows where mainstream media goes. Now, can you take out an ad in the New York Times to sell heroin? No, unless the ad is penned by psychiatrist Sally Satel, friend of Steve Saylor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, unpaid advisory board member for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. 2004, she published a piece in the New York Times, "Doctors Behind Bars, Treating Pain is Now Risky Business. How is this for shifting the narrative? Pain treatment is an area ripe for misinterpretation. Many patients who seek doctors' help have already tried non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs and conventional opiates like codeine and even surgery, yet they are still in severe pain from cancer, degenerative arthritis, nerve damage, or other conditions. Large doses of medicines like hydrocodone, Vicodin, oxycodone, OxyContin, morphine, or methadone may be required." So Dr. Sally Satel plugs Oxy by name, quotes a Purdue shill claiming that 1 in 10 Americans in pain could benefit from a long-term, high-dose treatment with the drug. So all sorts of insights here on how the news works. PR operatives gamble every time we pitch a story. Sometimes we lose. We try to minimize the losses, but all sorts of things can go wrong. The editor can blow the headline. The paper might break the embargo date. It might misquote your client. It could accidentally quote you. An off-the-record statement could bleed into the story. Your adversary might have the goods on your client, and a regulator or the government might step in and skew the story. Other news might eclipse your story. The reporter you are working with might get scooped. Your source could get cold feet, and it might turn out that your client has been lying to you the whole time.
A villain, or get a law changed, or expose corruption of some kind. That's why you do a news story, not just to see your name in the newspaper.
So, but your job was to get your clients not just their name in the newspaper, but to do those kinetic things in the real world.
Right.
And I've suddenly become very aware that you're on my podcast, and we're doing media about it. But it's interesting because thinking about it, podcasting has become part of this sort of potentially toxic ecosystem. You see a lot of, well, first of all, an example from my own life is China trying to pay me to post this video about how COVID must have come from the American white-tailed deer. It's like this poorly narrated, animated video, and they were just going through everybody with a YouTube following, and YouTube is like 1% of this audience, so the bar is pretty low.
All right. I read through this book in about 2.5 hours today. It's a lot of fun. November 12, Dennis Prager, 76 years of age. He had a serious fall at his home. He was taken to the hospital, went in for emergency back and neck surgery, and everyone who knows anything is being incredibly tight-lipped. My favorite moment in this coverage is when Julie Hartman asked Dennis Prager's adopted son, Aaron, what do you think Dennis is thinking about this situation? And Aaron has to admit,
I mean, from what we know is that he's not really aware of much. We're trying to keep him. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here.
Of course.
Not aware of much, right? He's out of it, right? So there was this beautiful long wind up.
Oh, he's a the facts on the ground remain. He's a strong individual. He's living in God's grace. We're living in God's grace. We're having this conversation right now in God's, just by God willing it to happen. And hopefully people can take away from it, some positive. And that's the essence of goodness, is trying to impart goodness on other people and helping them.
What do you think he's thinking right now about his situation?
I don't know if he's aware of what's going on, quite frankly. But I mean, hopefully, from what we know is that he's not really aware of much. We're trying to keep him. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here.
Of course.
Just because I don't know, I can't talk about.
So everyone who knows something about what's really going on with Dennis Prager isn't saying anything. So apparently he developed pneumonia about a week ago, and the kind of prolonged immobility. All right, it sounds like he's essentially been in a coma for 2 weeks, and that's going to greatly affect every system of his body and cause all sorts of problems. So we don't know how strong his respiratory system is. He was a cigar smoker, which generally affects the mouth and perhaps the throat and perhaps the lungs. So it's easy to develop a respiratory infection such as pneumonia. Sounds like he's in a medically induced coma or on a respirator or on very heavy-duty antibiotics. Aporia magazine puts out a lot of interesting interviews and essays, and this new one is an interview with Nina Power, and she talks about how being a woman is easier. So maybe I can just play a few minutes here.
You write that women, people don't appraise men sympathetically, and there's some data behind this. So Kate Mann wrote Down Girl and coined the phrase himpathy, the idea that people are more sympathetic to men than women, but the opposite is true. Women are regarded as in need of more sympathy than men. So contra man, this is actually from a quote from an article that Bo Weingart and Corey Clark wrote. People are less willing to harm a female than a male. Women receive more help than men. Those who harm women are punished more severely than those who harm men, and women are punished less severely than men for the same crimes. There's some interesting stuff where if you say that you're opening a homeless shelter for women versus a homeless shelter for men, people are much more willing to give money. There's much more resources for women who are poor, and also women are much more likely to be taken in by somebody of the opposite sex who wants to be with them, compared to like homeless men, for example. So there is a whole lot of evidence, but the idea remains that men are in some way favored over women.
Yeah, but I agree with the first part of your point. One of it got cut in the final version for various silly reasons, had nothing to do with me, but I actually wrote about a lot of trans men's memoirs, which are very interesting because they're largely under-discussed compared to trans women. And one of the things that was said in one of the trans men's memoirs was, and this was a woman who passed as a man, right, moved somewhere else and was basically, to all intents and purposes, treated as a man, had facial hair as a consequence of testosterone, balding, and so on. And there was no sense in which she was being clocked or whatever, right? So she was basically being treated like as a man would be. And what was really revealing and interesting in this memoir, and the memoirist didn't say that she had always thought she was a man or anything like that, but she said one of the things she noticed the most was that when she was a man or passed as a man, nobody cared about her feelings. Nobody gave a shit how she felt. Nobody opened doors for her. Like, people just didn't care. And she said it was very, very lonely. And I was like, wow, okay, so all this stuff about male privilege, and this is for someone who's basically had that experiment in their life, right? Which is a very rare thing to have. Of course it's...
Right, killer interview here with Nina Power. I wasn't really up on her
because it is
prior.
A heresy, let's be clear. You're not supposed to confuse the creator with the creation, but that's fine.
You don't wear that Ankh necklace to church, I hope.
Yeah, it's fine. Nobody cares. But basically,
so she's recently become a Christian, Nina Power.
Yeah, I think this thing about basically anthropology. So, I got attacked a lot since 2018, and I continue to be attacked. And it is quite a sort of, I'm a very upbeat sort of person. but it is a bit wearing, I've got to say, and it does sort of challenge one's faith in human nature. And like, I suppose the model of anthropology that's being presented by progressive culture is very, very limited. Like, it both seems to have a morality, but also not. Like, it separates people out into good and bad people. And obviously, if you've got a little black mark, if you're a bad person, and then people can say whatever they like about you and ruin your life and go after your friends. And
So the co-host here is Diana Fleischman, who's an American evolutionary psychologist.
and blah, blah, blah. But this is like a very, very impoverished and deranged anthropology. And I suppose Christianity very much stresses the idea that we're both capable of harm, committing harm, and also being harmed, and that no one is basically a pure victim or a pure oppressor, right? And simple things like this that I suppose everybody knew at one point, but seems to have gotten lost. And things like grace and forgiveness, and really just the act of confessing. In our church we confess together, like there's a collective confession in the liturgy.
What?
It's
How does it
you
work?
you can confess separately to a priest, but it's not Catholic in that sense, right? So, but there's a kind of statement in the liturgy which we all read out. I confess to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have sinned, and so on, and everybody says it together. And there is something very powerful. I mean, these are what as a rationalist, I don't know how you define yourself, but as social technologies, these are very powerful, right? Obviously, I think they're more than social technologies, right? But what I'm saying is, if you look at it from that point of view, the forms of social cohesiveness, the forms of social bonding, the possibility for like expiation, the possibility for resolution, for forgiving and for being forgiven are really profound. And if you have a culture that had that and then gets rid of that, you end up with a really brittle, unpleasant new forms of morality that don't have the anthropology to back them up. Right. And I think this is a lot of what's happened. You end up with really the terrifying bits of religion, but none of the actually kind and like flexible and dialectical bits of religion.
Yeah.
So you just have
I remember
insane. Yeah.
I've been to Unitarian Church, and I've also been to there was a London like Sunday Assembly, which was another kind of church for atheists. And I always thought when I was a bright back in the 2000s, and I was really into the atheist movement, I thought that we're going to be able to assemble social groups that are just as cohesive and just as have just the same solidarity and pro-sociality as religious groups, and it just never happened. Nobody was bringing somebody food when they were mourning for a dead relative. Nobody was watching each other's kids or even watching each other's dogs, for crying out loud. And so I have I know a lot of people who are in their 30s and 40s who are going back to religion. And, I have quite a cynical view of it, although I don't think that's necessarily bad, that people are realizing as they get older, especially when they have children, that if they want a group of people who watch out for them and who help take care of them, and who, especially as one gets older, it's harder to make friends, that a church is going to be the best way to do that. And also, I cry every time I go to church, even though I'm a rationalist. I find church extremely moving. I find synagogue extremely moving as well. So it's difficult. I've also considered going back to religion, even though as you're struggling with certain pagan things. I'm probably struggling with certain rationalist leanings and a certain cynical view of the whole thing. And I know that Ayan has become Christian as well. Fairly recently, has talked about it a lot. So this kind of returning to faith thing, do you think that you're a representative of that, or do you think there's something else going on?
I mean, it's hard to say at scale. Like, I haven't really looked at the stats, but I wouldn't really be surprised if people are returning to faith or reconsidering it. I mean, I think the Liberal Project, and I'm very pro rationalism in its place, right? Like, I think that people should be that natural human curiosity should be basically pursued, right, to the end. And I'm completely on the side of free inquiry, right? Like, wherever it takes us. And some of many scientific discoveries actually go against not only church teaching historically, but also our own ego and our own sense of place in the universe, right? So I'm very, very pro a kind of possibly anti-human conclusion, right? Like to scientific inquiry. But I think rationalism has sort of slightly reneged on its own promise in its own lifetime, and in a way that even I find depressing. And although I'm pro-rationalist, I'm not a rationalist in my orientation, but like, I'm an ally to rationalists. But I think I see how corrupted a lot of the rationalists became, and how actually a lot of rationalists went along with progressive ideas, even though they were scientifically idiotic. And it's interesting to hear you say about the inability to form communities, like the model of the atheist community. I mean, the left had the same problem, because even all these ideas of like solidarity and compassion and all the things the left was supposed to be good at, it didn't translate. It doesn't translate actually into practical mutual aid, really, rarely. I mean, in some cases it does,
solidarity and loyalty are different, right?
Yeah.
And loyalty is fundamentally a conservative and religious virtue, and without loyalty, you get groups that splinter, and you don't get anything cohesive. And and there's a lot of tolerance in religious communities. There are people you can't stand, and you still bring them food, and that's kind of a loyalty. That's not solidarity.
Absolutely, and I agree. I have learned that lesson very, very hard, I think. And yeah, loyalty, I think, is one of the supreme, so if not the supreme social virtue. And it's certainly true. I mean, even from a woke progressive point of view, like the church I go to is extremely diverse. Like it's the most diverse place in Southeast London, which is like a very poor area, but you have insane mix of rich and poor, old and young, people from all different ethnic backgrounds. Like it really, like if you want diversity, like Christian churches in London are it, you know what I mean? So but from a kind of woke progressive point of view, they wouldn't consider the church like that place, Yeah.
Even the two most diverse places I've seen in America are churches and shooting ranges.
Brilliant.
Shooting ranges are very diverse.
I'm sure in parts of America they are fused, but yeah, I don't know. And but it's absolutely true what you said. I mean, if I, obviously I've had these struggles, and I know if I went to our priest and said I'm really having a hard time, I would need to talk about something, or I'm struggling with money, or getting food or something.
Right. When you're down on your luck, you're struggling for food, you need a ride to the hospital, you are desperate, you need someone to turn to, you would like people to visit you in the hospital. Right. When you're physically or spiritually or mentally or psychologically incapacitated, really helps if you're part of a community.
The help would be there, right? Absolutely. And I think every week when we do the piece together, like you look around and you say hello to everyone in the church, you shake hands or you bow, and what it does is kind of confer a kind of collectivity, which is very beautiful. And of course it's random in a sense, it's whoever decides to go to church, but that's the congregation, and you're committed to each other, and there are all these parts of the ritual that reconfirm that. And it works, and it's the sort of thing that the left were always trying to build. People were constantly saying, we need to build a new movement that will support each other and do all this stuff, and it's like, well, those things exist already for hundreds of years.
Yeah, I mean, of course they're tied up with this belief in the supernatural, and that's what I saw Doc.
Right, because belief in the supernatural helps people to overcome their own natural selfishness.
And Ayaan Hirsi Ali in conversation in New York at Dissident Dialogues, and he just kept pressing her about do you really believe that the Virgin Mary, I don't know what Catholic doctrine he was quizzing her about. I mean, there is a funny tidbit in Catholic doctrine where allegedly the Virgin Mary conceived Jesus not through the left ear or the right ear, but through both ears simultaneously. And that's I don't know if he asked about that, but this was what he kept pressing Ayaan, and Ayaan, who I don't know why she believes what she believes, but she just kept saying, I believe it, yeah. But she couldn't offer and this is what the problem with trying to square this with people like Dawkins, who are trying to square this, because people are involved in these communities because they have a magical social and healing power, and people are willing to suspend disbelief to have access to that. And I don't know if Dawkins needs it, but most people do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have a different take from both of those, which would be something like the model of truth that is presupposed by the framing of the question of a Dawkins. And even Dawkins admits that the West is culturally Christian, and he defends that history, actually. So, and I think he and many others in the atheist and new atheist movement and other rationalists and scientists wouldn't straightforwardly oppose Christian, don't actually in reality oppose it because they think it doesn't match up to a truth level or a level of proof or belief or consistency that they would like. And I think, I don't know, you have people like Stephen Jay Gould talking about non-overlapping magisteria. I mean, he's talking about kind of art and science, but I would say something else, or something that there are different models of truth, right? And the kind of the rationalist emphasis on measurement, falsification, repeatability, the scientific method that we've inherited, which is also historically precise and is also open-ended and is also shifting and changing. It's not to say it isn't the best model we have, right? Like it clearly is. For certain things, but I suppose it's all of the things that fall outside of that. And I would say that the way in which, when you read the Bible, for example, like I read the Bible out loud, and the way in which the truths of wisdom and the accumulated power of collective human wisdom that is incorporated in myth and story is another kind of truth. And I think if we reduce all ideas of truth down to this very narrow one, which is very effective in particular domains, we miss out on a whole range of anthropology, of emotion, of feeling. And even to give a kind of pragmatic answer, the ways of coping with the suffering that is attendant upon existence for everybody in different degrees at different times, but we will all suffer. We all suffer grief. We all suffer heartbreak. We all suffer loss and disappointment and all of these things. These are the same emotions and feelings that people were writing about 2,000 years ago. There is much to be learned from the accumulated wisdom of the past that doesn't just disappear the moment we think we're modern or we have particular technology. We're still the same kind of being. And I think this is probably what makes me conservative in that sense, is that I don't think human nature has changed as much as some people would like to imagine that it has or that it can do. And I think the positive aspect of that is that we have a massive accumulated set of myths, stories, and forms of wisdom that we can draw upon in order to understand ourselves better. And this itself is a kind of truth. So that's my defense of the truth of Christianity. And I think some stories are kind of better than others, just like some cultures are better than others.
Yeah, and I agree. And some forms of social magic, as it were, are better than others. Why is it important to claim the right to be unhappy, Nina?
Well, I think because melancholy is, well, first of all, it's a reality, and I think that people make themselves more unhappy by trying not to be unhappy.
I think this is another great point. I really like this woman, Nina Power. Reclaim the right to be unhappy. Like, life contains considerable amount of misery and pain for everyone. And to deny it is to deny reality, which doesn't seem terribly effective. So if you're down in the dumps and miserable, there should be some people that you can share that with.
Like this idea of toxic positivity, or I think the safety culture. Often when people try to protect themselves or their children from things, they actually end up creating more suffering and more pain, because people then become unable to cope with even the mildest setback. And as a species, we've become like so cosseted and so obsessed with convenience and getting what we want when we want it. And this is, liberal individualism in its apex form, that we forget that we can learn something from suffering, and that suffering is inevitable, actually. And really, when...
Yeah, depression has an adaptive purpose. If you suffer and you just stop doing the things that you habitually do, and you stop expending all sorts of energy in the habitual ways that you have done that, and you stop and you pause and you go through the suffering and you think about, how could I more effectively direct my life? Which of my values or which people in my life, which of my commitments are excessive? Who do I want to turn up their presence in my life? Who do I want to turn down? What's a better way of living? And so you go through the suffering, you go through the depression, you stop doing a lot of things that you habitually do. And so when you're ready to relaunch into life, you've thought things through, you've gained more clarity, and you've thought through the consequences of a new path for living. And it's highly likely that there are many adaptive functions for suffering and depression.
People experience adversity. This is how you find out who they are. Right? It's like when you're being savaged by psychopaths, it's the people who stand up for you. You're like, oh, okay, so I know you're my friend, right?
Okay, quick burst here from Mark Halpern on Two-Way this afternoon.
I am not media hater by any measure, and I think that, we women don't get far in life talking about...
Right, this is the woman who ran Kamala Harris's losing campaign.
Double standard. So that's not the point. But I do think a narrative, 107 days, 2 weeks fucked up because of a hurricane, 2 weeks talking about how she didn't do interviews, which, she was doing plenty, but we were doing in our own way. We had to, be the nominee, had to find a running mate and do a rollout. I mean, there was all these things that you kind of want to factor in. But real people heard in some way that we were not going to have interviews, which was both not true and also so counter to any kind of standard that was put on Trump that I think that was a problem. And on top of that, we would do an interview, and to Stephanie's point, the questions were small and processy about
dumb.
They were not informing a voter who was trying to listen to learn more or to understand. And I'm not here to say that the whole system was focused on us incorrectly. I'm just saying, again, of the things we need to explore as we move forward as a campaign and as a country, that does a disservice to voters. And I think back and think we should have signaled more of our strategy early on about podcasts and who we were trying to reach. And But we had a limited amount of time to reach the people we're trying to reach, and we were trying to go to them. But being up against a narrative that we weren't doing anything, or we were afraid to have interviews, is completely bullshit. And also like took hold a little bit. And we just gave us another thing we had to fight back for that Trump never had to worry about.
All right. Again, there's more of it. I'll read you one of the texts from Dan, who's pretty far into it. It's frustrating. Listen, there are legit points they make, and they obviously are not going to crap on Harris on this podcast. But the elephant in the room, the candidate, hangs over their strategic and tactical decisions. They were very frustrated with the Democratic super PACs. So it doesn't sound like they said she wasn't a good candidate. Doesn't sound like they said she was too liberal. Doesn't sound like they said Trump had a good message. It sounds like a lot of other stuff. So I'll listen to the whole thing. Maybe I'll post on Twitter about it. So here's another thing they said, put up my tweet. So David Plouffe apparently says in the interview that their polling never showed them ahead. Now, I don't know exactly if he said they were never ahead in a single state or what, but I assume that's what he means, because I know my friend David Plouffe does not care about national polling. Their internal polling never showed Harris ahead. Now, I reported that for weeks. And as this Poll Watch website or Twitter account points out, my evaluation of the internal polling was right. I appreciate the credit, but I wouldn't call it an evaluation. I would call it the reality of what all the Democratic and Republican polling I heard about showed, that they were even or behind everywhere, not ahead. Now, what they said was surge of female voters and the ground game would put them in the lead. But that's just not, that's just not the way polling works. So again, campaigns aren't going to say they're losing, particularly at the end when they want the bandwagon effect. The vice president did relatively consistently say she was an underdog. But I find it bizarre that this will be another instance in which people will say nothing about the fact that they weren't ahead. And yet the vice president took a lot of days off. One of the things they say in the interview is they couldn't do Rogan because they couldn't take a day off the trail to go to Houston. Then, of course, they say in the same interview, well, we went to Houston because we did a reproductive freedom event with Beyonce in Houston. And again, she took a lot of days off. So if they really wanted to do Rogan, I don't think it was a matter of they couldn't find time to go to Houston. I don't think they really wanted to do Rogan based on the available facts. But they claim in the interview they really wanted to do Rogan. They just couldn't.
All right, so they're still in the denial phase. All right, let's get Kip back onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, buddy. After that big show on Sunday, 4.5 hours, did you have to have IV fluids, or how do you recoup? How do you settle in after such a show?
It was an exhilarating show. So
yeah.
I've had this mild headache the last few days, but I was exhilarated and transfixed, transformed, taken out of my state during that show. But I did deliberately decide to step back and not do a show tomorrow because I don't want to just get into a habit of just streaming by reflex. I want to have damn good reasons for putting on a live stream.
The best kind of exhilarating, I think, is when it's your synapses are firing. Man, that's a good feeling. It's almost as good as sex. It is. It's almost as good as sex, isn't it?
Yeah.
Speaking of sex, I was thinking about you. I was going to open with something else, but I was thinking about the fact that we're going to have some sort of what would you call this? A succession plan for Luke Ford here in about 20 years, because you can't do it forever, bro. You know what I'm saying? So I'm thinking that means you got to have a Luke Ford Jr. sometime in the next, 18 months, 2 years, whatever. And I'm just wondering what kind of steps, if any, have you been doing to make that happen?
Well, the closest I had to that was Kyle, who was a brilliant young man who was a regular on the show for a couple of years. But I think he came to see that his best interest was served by putting his time and efforts elsewhere. So the best thing that I can do, seriously, in answer to your question, is to do the best, the clearest work that I can in the hope that some people will find some of it useful and will develop on it and take it in new and deeper and better and clearer directions.
You're missing what I'm throwing your way. What I'm saying is I'm having a baby mantra. What have you done to make sure that in the next 18 months you're going to have a woman, lasso her in, and then have a baby with her, so she can't be 58 years old like you. You catch my drift on that?
I do.
You might have to lower your standards and catch one that's 41 or 42, which isn't going to bother you a bit. But you might have to, the world is magical, Luke. if you go down to the nearest hospital, there's going to be a bar where the doctors hang out. You throw a lab coat on, put a stethoscope around your neck, and you plant a seed in that woman. You get where I'm coming from? You got to use, magic if that's what it takes to get us a succession plan going. So that's kind of what I wanted to start off with. That you might have to lower your standards. I think you're single for 58 years because you got pie in the skies standards. That's what I think. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing. We never went out and hung out and had a beer or whatever. But if I had to guess, I would say you set your standards real high, and no woman can, she can't do all those backflips that you want her to do. She can't be wear all those hats that maybe you want her to wear. And you might have to take a 6, But if she's a good conversationalist, that'll be okay, won't it? If she's a 42-year-old 6. So what's your thoughts? How did we get to where we're at, where we're having to come up with this emergency plan at this point, because you've waited so long in the game?
Well, I haven't been single for 58 years. I've had various relationships that lasted about a year, but I've just never married and never reproduced. So
Is there we won't call them excuses. Is there a barrier? Is there some barrier that me and the gang are missing as far as to what has kept this plan of action? Because I know you hear the clock ticking probably as loud as I do. So are you just fine with the fact that ship has sailed?
I'm not fine with the idea that ship has sailed, but I don't usually talk about it publicly.
Okay.
But
okay, you're going to get all Elliott. That's the way Elliott Blatt does. If you ever notice, he gets that way. He starts playing a shell game with you if you try to get too personal with him. So, okay. Well, the other improvement I was thinking we could make for Luke's life was we'll just call it the "Isn't That Curious" game, because you tell me you find yourself in these you find yourself in these positions where you're thinking bad thoughts and doing things that you might be a little ashamed of. And what I was thinking of is, without any judgment or any kind of damnation, play a little game with yourself the next couple of times that you find yourself in a compromising position. Think about my ugly mug, and that ought to fix things right there. And then think of Kip saying, "Isn't this curious?" And all that is supposed to do is to cue you into the fact of, how did we get here? And if you're like me, maybe it started off Channel 316 had women on a yoga mat, and the outfit that they were wearing was just too revealing or whatever. So in the "Isn't This Curious" game, you would kind of try to cut that little bit of cancer out, which means go to your remote control and skip Channel 316 or whatever, and see if that cures some of the evil, and how long that lasts. And I don't know. You ever played any like games like that?
Yes,
with yourself?
I've tried that all my life. These shortcuts to success or shortcuts to overcoming problems, and they're usually a delusion. So when I get into a problem with lust, that's not the real problem that's going on. The real problem that's going on is that I've gotten disconnected from other people, and so when I get disconnected from others, then the lust rears its ugly head and takes over my life. So my problems are rarely my problems. My problems are simply symptoms of deeper problems of lack of normal human connection, lack of ease with myself, decisions that I've made that have removed me from reality. And so they're prompts more than problems to be overcome with one easy trick.
Yes, your old mates from the Seventh-day Adventist would say you're lost in the secular world. You notice they use secular as a catch-all,
Yes.
for the world that we actually live in. I didn't catch the whole conversation, but you was talking about a fellow named Kenneth Michael Grace. And I was going to ask you, when you mentioned his name, I went back and watched, I guess, his first episode, which would have been closest to the time where you two had been together, but I guess were not together. And it was like episode number 2. He sounded reasonable. He sounded complimentary to your own talents. Maybe I missed it. Was this just a parting of the ways, or?
Well, it's very difficult to do this show with someone on a daily basis. You can. It's incredibly intense, and if you just look at the shows in the final few weeks, you'll just see that I'm not happy. And so Kevin was brilliant. Kevin was a consummate professional. There was nothing that I could have, asked from Kevin. But eventually, after almost 2 years of doing it, it was time for us to go our separate ways. And you will notice a profound change in what I talk about, how I talk, how I conduct the shows after parting ways with Kevin Michael Grace. And so I feel really good about the content, the quality of the content that I put out after I parted ways. Not that it was not nearly as compelling, it was not nearly as entertaining, it didn't attract nearly the audience, but I intellectually, empirically, cognitively feel much better about it. So there was a shift in tone, there was a shift in content. I lost 75% of my audience, but I gained more self-respect.
Now, I have had listened to maybe one show from you, maybe back in 2018. And that dude's different from now. That dude's he's a little bit judgmental. Not you, him. You get what I'm saying? 2018, Luke. Did you pick up about you ever noticed over the years, because I guess that's what, 6 years ago? I picked up, I only watched like one episode, but I was like, that Luke that I'm seeing there, he looks the same, but this guy's a little bit more judgmental. He has a little bit more of a Australian accent. I guess you've lost a little bit of the accent, but you were the same dude. But I just thought 2024 version was not so judgmental, or at least I don't pick up it. Maybe you're the same, and I'm just not picking up on it. But I was just gonna say, as you was talking to that lady from Aporia there, incidentally, I used to like that site, but some of their good stuff just comes and goes. I think there's a political element to that show, to where someday Nathan Kaufman is on good terms with them, and the next day his shit disappears. You ever notice that shit about their podcast material on YouTube?
I subscribe, so I have access to everything, and I just appreciate what they do. Doesn't mean that I pay the closest attention to everything they put out, but
right. Well, they've got some right of center guys whose opinion was on the YouTube, I guess, list of videos that are not there. So anytime I see that, I wonder if there's some political shenanigans going on there.
What's going on? YouTube has terms of service. I remember I would have conversations with people via DM, like people that I wanted to keep in my life, but I found there is no answer to people who are too stupid to get it. There's certain content you cannot leave up on YouTube, or you will get banned and your channel will get destroyed. And all these people that I was on quite friendly terms with, they would go, "Oh, I don't understand why you removed that video you just made." And if someone is too stupid to understand why I had to remove a certain video, there's nothing I can say. It can never be communicated to them adequately. It's just pointless telling people like that. Nathan Kaufman has had his channel removed from YouTube. People put up content and then they quickly realize that their channel will get deleted if they leave that content up. So they take content down. And I don't understand why people don't understand that. YouTube has fairly strict standards. And when I realize that I have violated their standards, I'm not going to just be, "Oh, okay, I don't care. Let YouTube delete years and years of my hard work because I'm going to take a stand for this particular piece of content." There are all sorts of other places online where you can post content that is outside of the terms of service for YouTube. So frequently I have posted to YouTube and then deleted it and just left it up on Rumble. And so many people don't understand why I do that. And I've given up explaining it on a one-to-one basis. I'll explain it now because I'm talking to the world, so to speak. But people who don't put years into a channel and then seek to protect it by removing anything that would endanger the channel, they don't tend to have a lot of patience for those who go, oh, why don't you leave it up there and take a stand and then allow YouTube to delete 10 years of your work?
Yeah, Rumble, incidentally, is the place I have to go to whenever I want to rewatch the 16-minute George Floyd video, because every once in a while I'll just say, let me watch that again just to see if there's anything within that 16 minutes that would justify burning down 160-something cities. There never is, by the way. I was going to say, with that Diane lady from Aporia, got me thinking, the dark feminine, how that it just gets worse and worse every year. At least what I see on YouTube, it gets worse and worse every year to where their attitudes are getting more whorish, lack of, mothers. They don't even want to be mothers. And just a total unleashing of the dark feminine. And, I think back to when the civilizations fell, like in Greece and Rome, it was more of a queerish type of a deal. But Baghdad in the 11th century, they were going along so swimmingly, and they too caught that whole liberalism. And I told you it becomes sort of an Ouroboros type of deal. And with them, I think the spot where the shit hit the fan was when women started becoming either lawyers or judges. I can't remember which one it was, but it makes me wonder, how do we as men or as a society, how do we roll back the whorishness? How do we bring back the motherhood? How do we, you know what I'm saying? This wave of liberalism, it's the end of us. If some reason you can't shake them back into being moms, roll it back to 1915 or whatever it is, which is obviously someplace Diane would probably say they don't want to go. So what's the cure? What's cure there? Because otherwise there's an evolutionary dead end.
Yeah, first of all, the cure is you can never change anyone but yourself, but you are capable of changing yourself. So you are capable of belonging to a community that protects the values that you are advocating. And so you can choose to participate in a traditional community that venerates and protects and glorifies everything that you say you're for. And and people come on here and want to hate on women or hate on Jews or hate on black people, but they almost always refuse to partake in any kind of community that works together to venerate and protect the values that they say they espouse. So protecting the values that you say you espouse, it requires work. It requires self-discipline. It requires subjugation of your own ego and your own mouth to be able to get along with other people and to live in wholly, happy, healthy, traditional community. And most people who come on here and espouse these traditional values, they're not willing to do the sacrifice of actually belonging to a community that lives out traditional values. But if you want to make change in the world, you have to do it on an institutional scale. You have to go belong to an institution that is going to reward and protect and venerate traditional values. And the most likely of such institutions is the religious one. But that's going to require all sorts of sacrifice. And most people just want to talk about traditional values, but they don't want to actually inconvenience themselves to do something to protect and preserve traditional values.
Right. But if that is the future, that means that we're going to have to align ourselves with either immigrants, first generation immigrants who tend to have a lot of kids and they won't remain first generation forever, or Muslims Americans or Mormon Americans, because pretty much
whatever I say, you'll come up with an excuse why you and everyone else like you doesn't want to do it. You don't want to inconvenience yourself, and you'll just come up with an infinite number of excuses of why you don't want to be bothered being part of something that is protecting and preserving the values that you claim that you espouse.
Well, I'm just saying
You've got an excuse. You've got 57 excuses for why you don't want to be inconvenienced.
No, I'm saying that I guess of that group, the Mormons aren't so bad. You know, they are religious zealots, but if you judge them by the fruits of their labor or by the products that they produce, I told you that's the same way I look at the Jews. The Mormons turn out some very nice G-rated people. You get what I'm saying? That's what they turn out to be for the most part, especially the ones that kind of radiate from Salt Lake City. You know, there's a whole lot of Mormons in Phoenix and a whole lot of Mormons in Denver and a whole lot of Mormons in Las Vegas and places like that might be a little bit different. But the ones that I saw that were from the Church of Latter-day Saints, they're nice people. You know, all that magical underwear, I don't care. I care more about how are they as neighbors, and they were excellent as next door neighbors. You couldn't ask for anything better. So nothing wrong with what you're saying, but so you agree that is the future that's coming, right?
I didn't make any proclamations about the future. I'm just saying that if people truly believe the things that they're saying with regard to preserving a traditional approach to life, then it requires some sacrifice and also an acceptance of humanity. There is no community that you could possibly join that will not let you down in all sorts of ways. You'll always be able to find a reason, an excuse why you can no longer be part of XYZ community, whether it's Anglicans or Southern Baptists or Mormons or Jews or any kind of traditional community. Is going to be flawed. It's going to have ego involved. There's going to be internal politics. It's going to require all sorts of self-abnegation on your part. You'll always be able to find reasons for why other people let you down and why you are then excused from joining forces with them.
You're talking about me personally, or you're just talking about man in general?
I'm talking about people who I experienced on this show and doing shows like this. I'm not focusing because I only know you as a presentation on YouTube and via some emails, but I am responding to the ideas that you're putting forward.
Yeah, no, 10-4 on that. 10-4. Speaking of that, could we close out with just a couple of minutes with me? I don't know that I've ever tried to explain how just a normal dude like me, I wasn't any kind of new age weirdo or anything like that. I was just normal working dude. Basically, 14-year relationship, 2 kids, had been in a house for almost 14 years, you know, all that stability stuff that you talk about. And then all of a sudden, just through a series of circumstances, became a ascetic, mystic. And when I think about how rare that is, geez, there's probably not enough of me to fill up an arena, a basketball arena. Do you agree?
I'm not sure. Americans overwhelmingly are choosing more and more individual lives to live alone. You're part of a much wider trend. Americans are withdrawing from institutions and social groups, from living amongst family and living among other people, to overwhelmingly going their own way and living alone. So your particular mystical experiences may be somewhat rare, but the empirical direction of your life to living on your own is increasingly common in the United States.
Yeah, you hear it. You hear it in the books. You know, Gnostics would say gnosis, and I told you Eastern Orthodox would say theosis, and the Greeks called it henosis. But basically, what happened to me was, the best thing to say, Luke, is, you know, there wasn't any pressure that was bearing down on me that day, but this happened in July of 2007. And again, I was a regular dude. I was a card carrying atheist, you could say, at that point. In fact, I loved Sam Harris had done a Aspen's Idea Festival talk in 2005 where he just dogged out organized religion, and I loved it. So to give you an idea where my thinking was, it wasn't anywhere in the realm of mysticism or anything like that. So anyway, I'm just messing around with a computer one day, and you know how your brain works. It's like butterflies, kind of going back and forth in your mind and with these little thoughts. and you need to tend to them or otherwise they won't go away. And then just right across, no different from any of the other thoughts. One says, go tell Digger he can go. Digger was my dog that was sitting behind me. And I thought, what a strange thought, because that wasn't anything that was pressing on me. It wasn't anything that I had to get done for work or for the family or anything. So what a strange thought. But I took it seriously. And I spun around in my chair. The dog was behind me, 10-and-a-half-year-old Dalmatian dog was behind me. And I said, boy, you know how much I love you. You know what a good dog you've been. But, if you're hurting, I'd rather have you gone and not hurting than here and hurting. So if you got to go, I'll understand. And I'm going to tell you what, Luke, that dog took one deep breath and he let it out and he died on me. And I was like, whoa, that blew my mind. It'd be different if that happened 2 hours or 2 days, whatever, after that thought. But it happened like 32 seconds after that thought. So that was pretty wild. But at that point, the passions got the best of me. I loved that dog. I rode jet skis with that dog. You remember the old stand-up jet skis? Me and that old Dalmatian rode stand-up jet skis. We rode Sea-Doos. We did all kinds of things together. He rode shotgun in my convertible before my children were old enough to ride in it with me. So we were tight. So I was brokenhearted, Luke, for about 2 weeks. And then I thought dawned on me one day, what was that? What was that? How did I know? Because I'm so rational that I don't even think in terms like that. But that same, my own brain fluttered up a thought, sort of a, do you really want to know? Do you really want to know? And I'm like you, Luke. I'm a rare dude that's optimized for truth, to the point where if it conflicts with things, I'm going to lean towards truth. And I'm going to tell everybody I'm sorry. I just leaned into truth there. So I was like, yeah, I think I really want to know. And then thus began just a series of something right out of Dante's, something right out of Dante or something, where at first I was sent down way into the abyss and was being called to learn some strange things from my own self, from a part of my brain that seemed to know a whole lot of things and was very keen on showing me just a particular series of things. And I remember one day, it happened to be some kind of a cosmic duality or something I was being asked to understand. And I guess the normal part of my brain didn't really get it. And the other part of my brain said, forget about it. Take the day off. Go exercise. Don't eat anything. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Your brain will be sharper. And I was like, what in the heck? But anyway, lean through the whole process. All the thing about the phoniness of desires and all that stuff. It was all going somewhere, Luke. And, it's something people would have to do on their own, but it was something that went for 5 months. And when it ended was what you might want to call some sort of ego dissolution or something. It was great, but then there was from that point forward, I've been connected to the squirrels and the earthworms and you name it, so it changed everything. It was a real permanence to something that you can't get necessarily, let's say, from an Alexander technique or from any sort of techniques. You have to keep, I guess with those techniques, you have to keep hammering it home. But there was a permanence with this that was unlike anything like that. So anyway, I
have no idea what Alexander technique or some other technique does or does not do because you haven't tried them.
No, but I can imagine with any sort of mental technique, you have to, you have to keep practicing it. It ain't just somebody sits in the room and tells it to you one time and it's done and it takes and it's sunk in.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Okay. I'll cop to that. I think that's fair.
Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
I
You
got
have
it.
to.
Yeah.
You have to reinstill that stuff. Same thing goes with sales things. So I was trying not to be too mystical. So anyway, Luke, I thought I'd lost my mind, but at the same time, I also knew that if I had been given an IQ test or whatever, my synapses were just firing better than they ever had. My mind was in a better place than it ever was. My thoughts were pure and but the only thing is you're in such rarefied air. That's what I told you before. Trying to reconstitute a life from that, because nobody lives in that, Luke. Nobody lives in that. So it was such a hard thing to try to do a balancing act, because you're up there with somewhere like
it's very hard to live in the mystical. It's very hard to take the mystical and bring it down to earth and make it practical and useful.
Or even explain it. Or who are you going to get to read the Enneads from Plotinus? Who are you going to get to read that? Who are you going to get to read some of that stuff? Shit, they ain't going to read their driving manual unless they have to, So anyway, I didn't mean to get too...
Okay, Kip, I'm going to move on. Good to talk to you, bro.
10-4. I hope that wasn't too far out there.
Nope,
but maybe
that was
that'll
fine.
give us a little bit of understanding. Thanks, bro. See ya.
Thanks, bro. Take care. Bye. Okay, I want to get the thought here from Mark Halperin.
And as this poll watch website or Twitter account points out, my evaluation of the internal polling was right. I appreciate the credit, but I wouldn't call it an evaluation. I would call it the reality of what all the Democratic and Republican polling I heard about showed, that they were even or behind everywhere, not ahead. Now, what they said was surge of female voters and the ground game would put them in the lead. But that's just not, that's just not the way polling works. So again, campaigns aren't going to say they're losing, particularly at the end when they want the bandwagon effect. The vice president did relatively consistently say she was an underdog. But I find it bizarre that this will be another instance in which people will say nothing about the fact that they weren't ahead. And yet the vice president took a lot of days off. One of the things they say in the interview is they couldn't do Rogan because they couldn't take a day off the trail to go to Houston. Then, of course, they say in the same interview, well, we went to Houston because we did a reproductive freedom event with Beyonce in Houston. And again, she took a lot of days off. So if they really wanted to do Rogan, I don't think it was a matter of they couldn't find time to go to Houston. I don't think they really wanted to do Rogan based on the available facts. But they claim in the interview they really wanted to do Rogan. They just couldn't find time to go to Houston.
I've said this before on your show, Mark, and I've written it many times. The Democrats have no one to blame for themselves. They could have said earlier that Biden was failing. Obviously, Dan Turrentine was shouting that to the wind for a long time. Some of us were writing about it. They didn't. When he finally proved that he could not make it, Kamala refused to ever say that she ever saw anything wrong with him. At a certain point, it's like, are you going to believe us or your own lion eyes? Like, we knew what was going on. She just didn't bring it. And so I'm not surprised that what she said is exactly what she's been doing the whole time. I think every time the Democrats had a chance to get ahead, whether it was with their big push out of the gate with white women loving her and $1.7 whatever billion, they just whiffed it every time. And you know what, as a matter of fact, that 2 weeks that she lost from the hurricane, that would have affected everybody, not just Harris, right? I don't know.
Had the same thought.
Yeah, and then someone else got shot. I think that it's refreshing. I know it's not done in politics or often.
Do you find it phenomenal that was what she said? I do.
It is just breathtaking, especially that's what ran for president. The things she didn't do, they didn't let her do because she couldn't do them. Mm-hmm. And the hurricane, if a capable leader who is actually in the administration, the vice president of the United States, that's an opportunity. In stormy seas, people cling to the life raft they're on. She could have gone to North Carolina. She could have said, I'm here to help. And we're going to make sure every resource at our disposal is in your hands. And that could have been a great moment for someone who's capable. But after watching her there, I think sometimes the cruelest thing you can say is that a candidate's doing the best they can. Yeah. And that's what I saw there. $1.5 billion. I could have lost that race for only $1 billion.
Exactly. And maybe it would have even been closer.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the things, Alex, that you said throughout the campaign was that don't think it's impossible for folks to think anew about Trump, that even though he's supposed to be so familiar, and leaving aside McDonald's and the garbage truck, younger people who got to know him through the podcast, they all thought anew about him. that he did things on those long podcasts that were different. And I spent the time watching them, and he was different, and he got it. And now I'm trying out my theory on you. So during the transition, he's been virtually invisible. There've been the controversies over the nominees, but they're driving message from others. Home and down on the border today, the tariff announcement, he did it, but not on camera. Is this a potential way of governing where, in fact, he does what everybody said? Focus on the policies, keep your personality largely out of it. Is that what we're seeing now?
I think that's pretty much what you're seeing. I've always wondered when we would see a president, a governor, a senator govern from outside the White House or the State House, govern bottom up, get out there with the people, get out of the box. But no, everybody, all the candidates work so hard to achieve status and the accoutrements of power that few people actually roll up their sleeves and get out there with the folks and govern bottom up. In a world where we're all connected by these things, you don't have to be in the big mansion. You don't have to be in the White House. And you can be on the people's side of the table. And in a populist environment, which side of the table do you want to be on? I mean, the thing that kills candidacies is they win. They gain power, they gain office, and the candidate who used to be one of us becomes one of them. I think you're dead right. I think you're seeing Trump, in effect, continues the campaign because that's who he is, populating the administration with outsiders and governing outside in.
Nancy, to me, he's acting like Elon Musk. He's doing big, bold things. He's not caring what people think, and people like that. People like to see big, bold things. They don't like little things. They like big things. And I think Musk is it's not a coincidence that Musk is there. How do you appraise my theory that he's on track to be more powerful than he was, even though he's a lame duck?
Well, it's interesting because even people that have been super MAGA, I mean, some of them love sort of the showmanship and, the chaos and the circus, but a lot of them really don't. I mean, you'll hear a lot of people that are super Trump fans that are like, I'd rather, I don't really need his tweets a lot. He is showing, I don't know if I would call it a different, I guess it is a different kind of discipline. And he's just giving us a fire hose of potential candidates without him having to sort of like get in front of the camera all the time and talk them up. I will say, and I don't know if this is germane exactly, but I'm sure we'll get around to it. I've been speaking to some people, obviously that can't speak on the record yet, including some of them that are potentially up for positions. And I was told somewhat reliably that he's going to gut what is there now down to the fourth layer. Like everybody is going to be gone because he did not have a good time last go around. I got a quote from a reporter who was there during the 2016 transition, and she asked him at one point, like, what he might have done differently. And it's like, well, it took me a little while to figure out the good guys from the idiots. And that people were not carrying out what he wanted.
Trump's story at chapter 2. Once upon a time, there was a place called Washington, and things were going great. And then this disruptive guy came along and appointed all these outsiders. And oh my heavens, why did he do that? Isn't that strange? And he's destroying all our norms and institutions. No. Let's go back to chapter 1. The American people were hurting. The American people were heartbroken. The people they trusted and sent to govern for them let them down. And not only that, not only forgot about them, but disrespected them and what they had contributed to their country and abandoned them and their dreams. And then we get to chapter 2. And now I think he believes he's only got 2 years to make these big changes.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what's going to happen in the midterm. It's like Israel. If you don't win the war in the first 2 weeks, America moves along. So I think he is pushing hard right now. And Nancy, I think you're dead right. He's going to wipe the table clean.
They say, he's a gregarious guy. He's a funny guy. And, we've all seen that sometimes, but we've also seen him be a real tool. And I think he has an opportunity now, especially with younger people. I mean, he was, going on these podcasts. Like, they're the ones that are listening now. Everybody that's like older, they're maybe codified. Like, let them see someone that isn't just kind of so obnoxious.
You do have young people. If you remain an outsider, nobody in the establishment can laugh at the little people. But if you're an outsider, you can laugh at power. So stay out there, be human like that. That's great. But I see all that happening right now. My big concern, it would be not getting enough substantive change done early.
All right.
Right, and Coulter was live from the Comedy Cellar a few days ago.
Well, you might have ambivalence.
I was absolutely ecstatic. I mean, I soured on him because he didn't keep it. He didn't build the wall.
Right.
He didn't deport illegals. He didn't end dreamers. And I do want dreamers deported first, by the way, ahead of the felons. Put a pin in that.
Oh God!
He didn't
hit the ground running.
End anchor babies. And I mean, I didn't leak this. He leaked it. I didn't leak it. I showed up in the Oval Office I think I told Bill. I showed up in the Oval Office April 2017.
What were you wearing?
I don't remember what I was wearing, but it didn't matter because I was standing right up against the Resolute desk yelling and cursing at him for about a solid hour.
Wow.
It could have been anybody in the whole area of the Oval Office because we were yelling so much.
Now, having a woman angry and yelling at him must have been very unusual for Donald Trump. But go ahead.
But he should have listened to me then. He kept calling me. We kept talking, but I really got fed up with him. Third budget bill.
Okay, let's get Elliott Blatt back onto the show. Elliott, what's going on, man? Elliott Blatt.
Hello, blessings. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. So
love means never having to say you're sorry.
Do you mind if I shift gear?
Please, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Love is love, bro. Love is love.
Yes.
Do you mind if I shift gears a slight bit?
Please.
Do you think we've exhausted electoral politics? Okay. So I wanted to recount a story I had this past Saturday and get your response.
Okay.
Would that be okay? Okay.
Please.
So, excuse me. So, Saturday rolled around, and I had this long list of various errands I had to run, various things. I had to buy this, I had to buy that, I had to bring this there. I had to just run around town and do lots of sundry errands and things. And it was a sunny day after a long week of rain, and so the sun had come out the first time in a long time. So it felt good, it was just a nice day of ticking off things off the list. You know what I mean?
Yes,
just
sir.
Getting things done. It feels good, Yeah. You got a long backlog of things you got to do, and you just got to tick them off so you can just be free of them forever, And so one of these things I had to do, I had to buy this particular adapter for a computer to connect a monitor to a laptop, And the only place I could get this adapter was in downtown San Francisco, which is a place I seldom go because it's just become a war zone of fentanyl and addicts and just generalized decrepitude, And nevertheless, I had to go there. So I went there. And so it's like 2:33 in the afternoon. So at this time of year, the sun is kind of starting to set. It's kind of starting to set, Yeah. And in the winter, when the sun starts to set, there's kind of like this really nice reddish, orangish hue to the sunlight, It's this very evocative, beautiful, sort of plaintive feel to the light in the air. Have you observed this?
Sometimes, yes. I mean, they're particularly spectacular sunrises and sunsets in Los Angeles.
Yeah, but it's particularly in the winter. It's like the winter sort of, because the daylight's so precious. The sunsets are so vibrant.
Yes.
And so this is an important detail. So I don't bring things up just for wistful rumination here. I'm just laying down some foundation. And so, when you go downtown, there's very, very little parking, So you're just driving around looking for parking, and then occasionally, sometimes, once in a blue moon, you're looking for parking, and then you turn down the street, and then boom, somebody's leaving a spot. You get one of these sort of just divine, transcendental feelings when somebody's leaving a spot, this precise moment that you're looking for a spot. You've had this happen, right?
Yes.
It feels great, doesn't it?
Yes.
Do you feel like touched by an angel or something? You feel like there's some sort of divine providence going on when this happens?
Yeah, it's the flip side of when the opposite happens.
Yeah. So anyway, this happened. I got this spot, it was sort of like in a back alley it was like in a back alley on the opposite side of the building or the place I was trying to go to. And so I got the spot at park to get out, and I start walking through the alley to go to the store that I'm going to get this computer thing. And so while I'm going there, I pass like a homeless man, and he's got a dog with him. Are you familiar with this scenario?
Yes, yes.
So the dog as, prop, as, inducement to give to so no one's going to give to a crusty juggler, in the void. But if they have a dog, you're going to stop and think. In fact, I've seen videos where people have dropped off bags of dog food for the dog, but just left the homeless man high and dry. I've seen one of these videos recently. So I'm walking past. I realize this is a long story, and I know you're probably getting bored and everything. But so the sun's setting in the west, and this dog has like this reddish brown coat, but it's more reddish than brown. It's a very reddish dog, like a ginger dog.
Okay.
Right. And then added to that, there's like this reddish yellow sunlight coming in and like passing through the fur of the reddish dog.
Yes.
And this has the effect of sort of amplifying the reddish hue of the coat. It's like this electric maroon, bright, brilliant red. This dog just kind of lights up in the sunset glow of the setting sun, And just as I'm seeing this, I'm awestruck already. And then just as I'm seeing this, the homeless man just reaches out and pats the dog. Just very nice, comforting pats to the dog. And he doesn't even solicit me for any money or anything, but he pats the dog, and the dog sort of recognizes that he's being patted, and he's very happy. And so I said, well, what a nice scene that was. Because, bear in mind, there's so many homeless people in San Francisco that I have this tortoise-like shell.
Yes.
Sort of, that's I've constructed to sort of resist the pathos that is the myriad of homeless people in San Francisco. And I'm like, oh, well, that was a very nice scene. And then I started thinking to myself, oh, man, maybe I should get that dog some dog food at the very least. You know what I mean? You ever have this happen to you? And then I'm like, but you're falling for the dog trick, And then I've got 2 blocks to walk at this point. I'm sort of ruminating on this. I'm like, oh man, but that dog was so nice. And that, this is totally a loser. I'm like, what's the right thing to do here? And so bear in mind, okay, so prior to this, I've been researching this part on the internet, and I figured the cheapest I could get it for was $30, right? So I'm going into this situation prepared to spend $30 for this part. And so I'm going into a situation where I'm expecting to spend $30. And so I'm thinking about the dog. I'm thinking about the red light and the nice, beautiful hair the dog has, and the pathos of the whole situation. And it's sort of holiday season, and I'm doing all this stuff. I'm just these are the thoughts I have. I go to the computer store. So I finally get in the computer store and I look for the thing, expecting to find $30, and I ask him for it. And he shows up, and it's $15. It's $15 cheaper than I thought it would be, right?
Okay.
And so I'm like, oh, what a windfall, And so I buy it, I pay for it, and I leave the store, and then I have a choice. I'm like, oh man, I should really get some dog food for that dog, And I know where I am because I used to work in this neighborhood, so I know that there's a Target nearby, And I'm like, I get out of the store, and if I go left, I go back to my car. If I go right, I go over to Target and buy dog food. And I'm sitting there vacillating between the two. Like, do I go left? Do I go right? Do I go back to the car? Do I go try? And I said, you know what? I already spent the money in my mind, so I have $15 to play with here. So I went to Target. And then, I've been at a Target recently, but, Targets have like this grocery section and stuff. And so the grocery section has obviously groceries, but also pet food. And so I said, all right, I'm going to buy this dog some dog food, right? And so I go to the dog food aisle, and I find a bag of dog food. There's like all kinds of dog food, obviously. Big bags, small bags, organic bags, non-organic bags, just this whole plate. And I don't have a dog. I don't even understand the whole dog food universe. And so I reach for one bag, and it's like $18. I'm like, bro, that's excessive, And I'm like, you gotta go this other bag of dog food, which is not organic, and it's like $7.99. And I keep thinking, oh God, do I spend $18 or do I spend $7 or $8, $7.99? I go back and forth, and I'm like, it's like this wrenching decision for me, I'm sure you've been here, bro.
No, I don't suffer from this kind of excessive compassion. None of this would have ever occurred to me. I've never done anything like this in my life.
Okay, so I said, fine, fuck it. I'll buy the cheap bag. I cheaped out. I went for the $7.99 bag. So I picked up the $7.99 bag, and I'm like, and I'm walking towards the cashier, and I'm thinking, can I really go back there with just a bag of dog food and nothing for the homeless man?
What did you spend the $15 on?
On a computer part.
I thought there was a $30. I thought you went to a store already prepared to spend $30, and it was only $15.
Yes. So basically, in my mind, I had an extra $15.
Oh, you were prepared to spend $30 on a computer part, and it was only $15. Okay.
It was only $15. So I'm working with like the house's money at this point.
Okay. So let's start to wrap the story up.
I felt like there was some sort of divine providence happening here, right?
Okay. So what's the upshot? Okay.
So anyway, I buy the $8 bag of, and I can really just bring him back a $8 bag of, and just nothing for the man himself, just only some dog food. That just seems kind of gauche, And I sit there thinking, what to do? What am I going to do here? I got to bring him something, And I'm sitting there just, head in hand.
Okay, how about wrapping this story up in the next 60 seconds so we can get to the point?
So anyway, I said, all right, I'll bring him something. And then I said, so what I did, I ended up buying a $4 bag of Fritos. And so I bought the bag of Fritos and the dog food, put it in the bag, I paid for it in one pocket, and I just walked by him on one way of the car. I dropped it off. I said, here you go, bro. And he's like, oh, thanks, dude. And then I dropped off the dog food and the Fritos, and then got in my car and went home. So how's that for like a clean ending?
Okay, very, very clean. And are you wondering if you did the right thing? You got a great burst of...
Well, the thing is like, it was like the little things, bro. If the light had not been like setting and the dog fur wasn't this brilliant red, I would have just not thought about it. But it just so happened that because of this conflation
of all sorts of different factors, you did something unusual.
Different elements.
Yeah.
It all pointed to me doing this sort of going out of my way sort of act of, quasi generosity here. And I'm just wondering, like, is this what life is really like? The situation, like this particular situation arose, and the situation was the boss, and then I acted accordingly.
Now, it sounds like you were attuned to the situation. He didn't stab you.
Attuned to the situation, and I basically deviated from my sort of default policy, and then acted according to the situation. And isn't that what we all need to do, bro? We need to just be attuned to the situation and act accordingly.
Yes, but I would not say with regard to feeding homeless and their animals. I would strongly discourage that. You do want to be attuned to the situation, but attuned to the situation of what does your boss want? How does your boss like these documents formatted? I mean, what does your sister need? What does your best friend need? What does your neighbor need? So by all means attune, but I would discourage attuning to complete strangers who are homeless and therefore likely dangerous and mentally ill and unpredictable.
All right. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. I just feel like that's not truly being attuned to the situation. That's being dogmatic. It's not.
Yes, it's having it. Yes, it is. It's having guardrails. So you could attune to a situation and have ecstatic sex in a public toilet. You can be so attuned to the situation that you find yourself sharing a heroin needle. There are all sorts of situations that I think people should simply rule out, no matter the beauty of the sun setting on a dog. Now, this worked out beautifully for you, but I think that people, it's too exhausting to be attuned to every situation. And so by all means, be open to it, particularly if you're a poet or that works for you. But generally, people need guardrails to create situations where they should be strongly incentivized to attune. But I think for most people, just being wide open to life in a big city such as San Francisco is a really bad policy.
Yeah, I can hear that. At the same time, it's like
this worked for you, and these things
it
will
worked.
work.
It was like a spontaneous moment that worked. Bro.
Yes.
Like I felt good. I felt like I was shaking things up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's a time and a place for that.
Yeah. I don't know.
But I would not recommend it. I would not recommend it for anyone else. I'm glad this worked out for you. I would not recommend it for you going forward. I would not recommend it to everyone else. I think people are much better off in these sort of situations having guardrails where people should minimize their interactions with the homeless unless they are specially trained and operating under the rubric of some kind of group with training. And so people are not just operating on the basis of their feelings. Like this time you operated on the basis of your feelings and it worked out. I think that's really bad policy in general, though in this situation it did seem to work.
Yeah. I hear you. I've been on both sides of this. It was like I felt good about being able to sort of break out of the mold, like the habitual programming, and I could just transcend that and like just grasp the spontaneous.
Right. You grasped his humanity and the dog's humanity and the situation's humanity, and you got in touch with your own humanity, and you did something that you. When was the last time you'd done anything akin to this?
I couldn't remember.
Okay.
And that's
okay. Yeah.
And it struck me as like odd. That's partially why I'm like, I've been so self-centered, bro. I've been just like grinding and thinking about old EB. Nobody else.
Yeah. Well, that's why many people find benefit from volunteering, but volunteering not in the sense of individual initiative, but volunteering in the sense of aligning yourself with some group above and beyond yourself.
Yeah. But yeah, so you're sort of layering on this sort of communitarian notion.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That I'm not participating in.
Nope.
I'm experiencing the life in the raw as it presents to me through my senses. And you are like, I'm experiencing life through my community.
No, I mean, obviously my community is not
you're
with
going
me.
Through it. You have
I have strong buffers. I do not hand out stuff to homeless. Right? There are all sorts of people that I strive to minimize all interactions with, including the homeless. But I volunteer several hours a week, up to 20 hours a week.
20 hours.
Up to. That's the absolute maximum. Very
That's
rarely
a
above
tremendous
15.
amount of time, bro.
Yeah. The average
It's
is
a tremendous
probably
amount of time.
more in the neighborhood of 5 to 7. Occasionally more.
Okay. And so you don't like to just go out there and raw dog it?
Not with homeless. Like,
Yeah.
by all means, raw dog it with your wife, but don't raw dog it with homeless psychotic people.
Good point. Good point. Well, that's what I wanted to discuss, bro.
Thanks, bro.
All right.
Thanks, man.
All right. I'll reflect.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. All right, I wanted to play a little bit more here from Ann Coulter.
Bill, 2 years, first 2 years, he had a Republican House, Republican Senate, third budget bill, no wall funding. And that's when I really let him have it. I was being nice before that. So
what did he say for himself?
Well, he lied. He said, let's finish the wall. He just figured out, I'm not going to build the wall, but I can fool the rubes.
Right.
So I was kind of mad at the rubes for falling for it. You know how many miles he built? 47 miles.
I can
now,
get around that.
now, I mean, I know you want to get to the story. I want to keep interrupting you, but this is fascinating to me. Is that because he never really wanted to build the wall?
I think he's a lazy F.
Oh.
I think he's lazy. He didn't care. And I also think, but I think this is different this term, which is why I'm really ecstatic. And by the way, it wasn't just his victory. We took out, I don't know if any of your listeners know or care, but these absolutely lifetime Democratic senators that I never thought we were going to get rid of.
Time at an episode of Race Wars, you was on the phone with him yelling.
That could well be.
Yeah.
There was a lot of acrimony with him not keeping his immigration promises. And also, I mean, he just seems like such a lazy. He wouldn't get out of bed to make a call to Congress. Could you fund? No, I'm just going to keep tweeting and eating hamburgers in bed while Jared Kushner ran the country.
By the way, I heard on on those All the Rest is History podcast. Do you know who else was very lazy and wouldn't get out of bed before like 10 a.m.? Hitler. I swear to God.
That's true. That's right. You're right.
I swear to God, you can look it up.
Well, but that doesn't make you lazy. That just means you're a night person. I don't think
Hitler was known to be lazy. He was not detail oriented.
I think it'd be hard to make.
Anyway, Dave, and I complained to him because he.
Oh, I know him.
David Cole.
The doctor?
No. This is
Wait.
a writer. And he's
David Cole is sort of a Holocaust denier. Is that the same
They
David Cole?
accuse him of that. No, he is not. He's made documentaries. He found a concentration camp in France that the Holocaust Museum didn't know about, and that and they use his footage.
He was a major Holocaust denier, and he changed under a great deal of pressure.
He is Jewish, but he's been going.
David Cole is an attention seeker. Sometimes to attract attention, he does interesting, compelling work, and other times to attract attention, he does less impressive work.
Going after these people. Every column is about how the right wing, there's at least like half the column, is flirting with the Nazis and flirting with anti-Semitism. And I've been complaining to him after every column saying, I'm on Twitter all day. I never see these people you're complaining about. You're always raising, can you stop talking about the Nazis? So you ought to read him because he's all over this. And he says, no, Ann, yes, they are. Yes, they are. They think it's cute. They think it's impish. And no, it's stupid. It's enraging. And I think he's right that they are just they think they're being impish and they're being morons.
And Tucker is very dangerous. And he specifically had Darryl Cooper on, who I have a relationship with Darryl Cooper.
Really?
And yeah, and I like him. I mean, we have a good conversation. He's very blunt with me. I'm blunt with him. A lot of things he believes in I find very disturbing.
Like?
But no, just
Stan.
we have to wrap it up. And you're the best guest ever.
You're the most fun people to talk to.
Can I?
A few more minutes. You want to say anything?
Well, I want to ask, and she had mentioned earlier that we want to bring in the best immigrants. Who would that be if you were in charge?
How white do you want to be?
And are Muslims off the list as a matter of
only if they're really hot would I let them in?
He has a weakness.
I offered back when Trump and I were speaking when he was running for office. I said you can turn over the entire immigration bureaucracy to me. I will decide every case before breakfast. I just want a picture, name, country, age. Want to know how many work years we're going to get out of them. I'll just flip through them. It's not a hard decision. In, out, in, out. I'm a looksis.
It's like Tinder for you, huh?
It would be like Tinder. That is how I would do it, and I would be right 90% of the time.
And now, do you favor a particular racial categorization?
Good looking, hot, high IQ.
She's looking for, can read and fuckable.
So I'm basically looking for charade.
Thank you. Here I am.
Were you a popular girl in high school? Were you one of the hot chicks at New Canaan High?
New Canaan High, yes. I'm a public
There's a lot of
school
stiff
girl.
competition there.
Yeah, there were a lot of pretty girls. I sure didn't think of myself as hot.
By the way, Candace Owens is a Stanford High graduate.
And she sued for racism. Did you know that?
I think I've read something about
that. Is that true?
Yep.
She's probably right.
No, I remember reading about it in a David Cole column, and apparently it was not a very legit case.
Now, you wouldn't actually keep Muslims out, or would you?
No, I remember I was dating one during
did,
9/11
yes.
while suggesting
handsome
we
dude.
bomb them.
Okay, a little bit more from Mark Halperin's show. Oh, what the heck? No. Here we go.
Proximity is key. You've seen this with a lot of the you can't just be out in California hoping the phone rings. Being in Mar-a-Lago, being around the
Talking about Trump's picks.
president, being around critical people matters. And number two is having a vocal history of supporting the president matters. Those are the two biggest criteria that you can see. And I think that on the flip side, you've seen a guy like Pompeo, where just the slightest deviation has caused some of the, caused a fallout. So I would argue that proximity and your record matter.
Okay, Dan, what's your takeaway from these varied picks?
Yeah, I think, as Sean said, loyalty, but also the diversity of the picks represents the diversity of his coalition. I mean, the fact that he put a fairly pro-labor member of Congress as labor secretary, he did well with a lot of working class voters. I mean, the RFK vote was not unimportant to him. And so I think the cabinet actually does reflect his coalition. The question is, can he hold that coalition? How long can you hold the coalition together for politically? That's always the issue for president coming in.
It was funny. There's a CBS poll out this morning. Let me I'll pull it up as I talk. And the thing that was fascinating is they asked both parties whether or not certain nominees were good or bad. And with selection of RFK for Health and Human Services Secretary, good choice, Democrats, 47%, Trump voters, 80%, not a good choice, right? But here's the kicker. RFK scores a heck of a lot higher than Rubio, whatever. I mean, this is a guy heading HHS that is not pro-life by a stretch, which is usually a criteria of Republican voters, that you get somebody who understands the importance of life and defending it. RFK is quite the opposite. I think the takeaway on that is where things fit in the lexicon in terms of right now, the MAHA movement, wellness, vaccines, things like that have overtaken a lot of the traditional issues that Republicans would normally kill for. The idea that you are pointing.
So Republicans, Donald Trump and his campaign had control of their special interest groups, unlike the Democrats, right? The Republicans and Donald Trump were willing to buck their special interest groups, such as the anti-abortion crowd.
Pointing somebody atop of HHS that is openly anti-life is a very big deal for Republicans. Now, that also speaks to me to this broader point that the nominees don't matter. You are signing up for his agenda, not yours. And so that's sort of the two takeaways on that. But the idea that there's no backlash from the right, there's no SBA, Susan B. Anthony list, there's no Concerned Women from America, all of these organizations and women that have been critical leaders in the movement suddenly going, okay, we're cool with that.
Well, I think his ability to patch that together during the campaign, too, was a testament to the political skill of the candidate and the senior staff. I imagine that they have maintained very good communication with that group of pro-life support. And there are reasons that they are quiet and confident about what the president will do. As a Democrat,
the overriding takeaway is that the Republican base trusts Donald Trump to fight for the agenda. And they're like, okay, I get it. Tulsi's a Democrat. I get it. RFK said these, is not pro-life. But we trust Donald Trump to advance the agenda, and we understand that these people are vehicles for him. He has completely changed the mind shift of how these things are approached. I mean, a nominee normally would be like, you said this, you said that, this is what you voted on in the past. And everyone's sort of like, as long as you agree that you're signing up for his agenda, we're okay with you.
I'd say, Sean, you're right, but there's another factor, which you saw during the convention when the platform was changed to be less pro-life. And the pro-life groups complained, and Chris LaCivita said, go find another platform if you don't like ours. In other words, part of it is they trust him, but part of it is they were taught during the campaign that they can scream and yell, and then they don't get what they want. And the problem for the left, I think, compared to the right, and I think this is asymmetrical right now, is when an interest group complains and it gets what it wants, it learns it can get what it wants by complaining. When an interest group complains and doesn't get what it wants, it says, holy cow, if we keep complaining and not getting what we want, we'll look weak. Our donors won't.
Right. We train people how to treat us, right? We train groups how to treat us. And the Donald Trump campaign was firm, and it trained its special interest groups to treat it with respect and deference.
Give to us. Our members will be dispirited. Better to just pretend it didn't happen if we're not going to get what we want. And I think Team Trump sent that signal loud and clear during the campaign on almost every issue. And now they're sending it again during the transition with these picks. And if somebody wants to complain about them and then watch them get confirmed, they'll look impotent, and they don't want to look impotent as an interest group. They'd rather look close to a powerful new administration. We'll see, though, because some of these nominees are not out of the woods yet regarding criticism. Some of it is ideological. Some of it is more personal. But I think in the main, it's extraordinary dog not barking. But some. to be mocked for saying it matters who DNC chair will be. I continue to believe it matters if it's someone who's great. If it's someone who's okay, I don't think it matters. But I'm curious to see who gets in the race.
But that's the point, though, is that's,
Yeah.
I don't keep going back, but I think in 2012, we talked about this before, having the ability to lead and say, we need to do an after action report and we need to kind of be honest about where we are, takes leadership. And if you elect someone that's going to be a wallflower and put their head, then that does matter.
I agree, but I'm just saying some people say to me, who cares who the DNC chair is? And I'm saying I agree if it's just someone who's going to raise money and hire people. If it's someone who's a dominating figure in message setting and postmorteming, I think it does matter a lot for the party potentially. All right, speaking of the Democrats, Kamala Harris, big Politico story today. First story of this kind that I've seen. You can put up the headline, please. In which the balance of the piece is very much favorable towards the concept of her having a political future. And it says, she might run for governor of California. She might run for president again, but that, she was a great candidate. None of this was her fault. She's got tons of political capital, tons of goodwill. It's much more bullish on her prospects to either be the governor of California and a dominating figure and win that race, or run for president and not clear the field, but be a dominating figure and a big player than we have been on this program. So Dan, after reading the Politico story, did you decide you were wrong and Kamala Harris, the demand side for Kamala Harris is quite high?
No, I think that the same type of thing could have been written about Al Gore, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton. Yes, the kind of establishment like poo-pooed them, but if you had done a poll right after, in January of 2001, I think Al Gore was at like 40%. Like everyone wanted to do it again. So it doesn't surprise me that the perception is that she is the leader of the party. I think we've talked here about, so far the stories are about Joe Biden should have gotten out sooner. The problem with the left on woke issues, they couldn't penetrate on the economy. What hasn't happened yet are stories about her as a candidate, right? Why did they not, when they had the data that we've talked about for months, did they not drill down on immigration or the economy? There's been, I think, 2 stories, one in which supposedly she didn't go on Joe Rogan because they were afraid of offending interest groups. I think you will start to see more stories about her limitations as a candidate, because I believe that what cost her in 2024, and I've said before, I think this was a very winnable race this time around, even though she came in July and all the advantages that Trump had, is that the same character attributes that sunk her in 19 sunk her in 24, which is extreme caution, ability to make quick and nimble decisions, being afraid to offend various interest groups. So when you say you're going to run again, Ronald Reagan ran 3 times, but each time he ran, he was the same candidate with pretty much the same message, and he kept building on his momentum, getting stronger and stronger. She has never shown an ability to build off momentum. I mean, she had maybe the greatest launch in the history of presidential politics this time around, and kind of slowly the air came out of the balloon. And I think that whether who is going to force these questions about her as a candidate are her opponents. People who are thinking about 2028, they've got very skilled staff. They're going to start to leak stories to make sure that she doesn't jump to the front of the line and cut them out. And I don't think any Democrat fears her in 2028. They know she'd be a legit, somebody to have to deal with, but they don't fear that she's a dominant, strong candidate.
Yeah, let's just the Political article basically laid out three scenarios. First is running for governor in 2026. And there's within the article, I don't necessarily agree that the authors have their pulse on California from Washington, but they think that she'll clear the field from all the other folks that would be popular in Florida. And potentially, just as a side note, that she could then still maybe run for president. I don't agree with that. But then 2 is that she runs straight up 2028. And then 3 is that she gets on board and whatever and makes money. I have a hard time believing somebody that's never had a private sector job is going to choose number 3. I mean, I'd take the money and go sit on a beach, but I have a hard time. So I have a feeling that she ends up running for governor. To me, it would still be a huge, it's a big platform to have. She could probably get it a lot easier than and a lot quicker, right? It gives her something to pivot to much sooner than hoping that she stays alive till 2028.
So I was asked the question when somebody's potentially up for a job like that is not, can they win? And I think her chances of winning are overrated in that story. It's, does she want the job? Does she really want to go live in Sacramento, fight with liberals in the legislature, take over a state that's got some problems? I'm just not sure she wants to be governor of California. And if she has to be, well, she has to be governor for a full term before she can run for president again.
All right, this was from Mark Halperin's show yesterday morning. This is from his show this morning.
15 minutes on the official schedule for major donors in the $2 billion campaign.
If I were thinking of running for president and I was not named Kamala Harris, I'd be very excited at how offensive that is.
Okay. If she, well, let's do it this way. Raise your hand. This is for everybody, not just Dan and Sean. Raise your hand, not your electronic hand, your physical hand. If you think the vice president's going to take questions on either call, raise your hand. Let's see.
That's funny.
Let's see. I don't see anybody
one.
raising hands. I see some shadow. Michael
Oh,
Shaw
okay.
jokingly raising his hand just because he likes to be provocative. All right. No questions, probably. Raise your hand if you think there's someone on this call who has the dial-ins for both calls. Someone who has the dial-in for both calls. You are correct. We'll see how many I'm on, particularly once the Harris folks find out I have the dial-ins for both calls. We'll see if they change the number.
You just told them.
Block me. I know. You know what? I have other things to do during the times of the call, so I probably
Can
can't
I have
dial
it?
in. So I was just flexing. All right. Here we go. As I said, if you want to raise your hand, if you're up, it pops. Truth Social, Donald Trump, tariffs on Canada and Mexico, day one, tariffs on China coming soon. Sean Spicer, what is up with this? I think I know, but I'd love to hear your theory of why is he announcing tariffs before he takes office?
Because this is two things. One is this is what we talked about yesterday. He's filling the oxygen in the room. He's made almost all the personnel announcements. Now it's followed by the policy second. I think he wants to get these guys to take action so that he comes into office with a better situation.
Dan?
So I was wondering if the fact that Scott, all the stories yesterday morning were that the new Treasury Secretary was going to help, that the markets were taking off because he was going to be a moderating, calming voice to the president if there was a little shot fired across the bow of, you work for me, not the other way around.
Yeah. So I wrote this morning in my newsletter. Donald Trump doesn't love tariffs. He wants the American economy to boom. And I believe that although he's a lame duck, that the point of view he has now is he's going to be better at being president this time because he knows how to do it. He knows all these world leaders. He knows the levers and the buttons. And threatening these tariffs, you look at the reaction of the Canadians, basically said, our economy's dead if he does this.
Right.
The Mexicans, we can't possibly do this. The Chinese, let's all get along. They're not defiant because they can't be. America has Madonna. America has the world currency. America has the market. They have no choice but to play ball with Donald Trump. And he's just gonna put his boot on their necks and say, gimme, gimme, gimme. And he can tweet all he wants about the tariffs. Truth all he wants about the tariffs, never has to do them, but he knows now where the leverage points are. He doesn't know all these world leaders, but he knows their countries. He knows their predecessors. He's going to meet them, and not one of them can stand in the way of Donald Trump without him threatening them.
Well, and that's
they know
the point. He will cripple their economies. China's economy is even a lot softer than it was when he left office. Without market access, these guys are going to have big problems. This is the same play, by the way.
Remember the show from 2018, 2019, 2020, all the time hearing from people how China's on the rise, America's on the decline, or almost nobody comes here anymore and tries to argue that China's on the rise, right? China is in deep trouble.
Like, it's cool. It's like people want to own it. They want a MAGA hat.
Okay, here we go.
Inside sources, man. Maybe I can give you a gig.
Michael, did you go to any of the pop-up Trump stores?
No, I didn't go to pop-up.
There's one in Rhode Island.
I wish I had. I never got to. If I were still making the circus, I would have gone to one because Trump loved them, and Trump felt about the Trump pop-up stores the way you're talking about the Trump merch in Vegas, which is like, it's cool. It's like people want to own it. They want a MAGA hat, and Harris just didn't have that same thing, even though demographically and in terms of like her relationship pop culture, she should have, but she didn't.
And the weapon that Democrats using, and then this is the report from New Hampshire, is right across the border, Seth Moulton is talking about transgender and guys and girls sports the way that a lot of normal people do. And Democrats are trying to use social pressure. They're waving their Starbucks cups and saying, you're not one of the good people, the cool people, the elite people. You can't have that opinion. And the people with that opinion are now on team cool, and it's not working. And I'm just watching. I'm going to be fascinated if in purple-leaning states, in New Hampshire, every Democrat in the legislature voted to keep guys and girls sports. Every one of them voted in favor of sanctuary cities. That was their strategy. Stick together. Trump will lose so bad. We'll all win by just hating Trump. Now they're going to have to vote on those issues in the coming session, and it's going to happen in states across the country. They're not going to have the social pressure tool to have people go, inside, I know it's crazy to let these biological males do this. I know it's crazy to have sanctuary cities, but I'm not allowed to say it. I think the voters are going to be saying, I am allowed to say it. In fact, all the cool guys with the cool stuff are saying it. And that's
Michael, one quick point. If you're in New England and you're drinking a Starbucks, you're not the cool guy.
Look, I don't touch the stuff. My wife.
I'm just saying, like, that's, better than anyone that there's Dunkin Donuts is king.
And what's so fascinating about that is I would argue that you could divide American politics into Starbucks versus Dunkin. You go to Starbucks, who is it? It's obnoxious, self-important people who work down right on at the seacoast in Boston. What are the guys who wear boots and aren't quite tied, who have 3 jackets on because they work outside? They all got a huge Dunkin' and a couple of sandwiches. Who has the ugly, garish art? It's Dunkin' Donuts. Remember the goofy ads they were doing with Matt and Matt, what's his name? And
Matt Damon.
Yeah,
Ben
that's
Affleck.
and yet here you are in New England where the voting doesn't work that way. That's why. Where did you see the shifts? Where were the biggest shifts, Dan, by percentage? They were in Starbucks country because secretly everyone knows Starbucks costs way too much and it sucks. Dunkin' costs far less and it's better.
Yes.
And now they're allowed to say it.
Preach, brother.
Amen.
Michael, what's New Hampshire? I would just say, though, to your point, Democrats had a moment this summer of like the hot breath summer, the camo hats. Like they had a moment. I mean, look, you could argue it was more in Blue America, obviously, than Red America. The way now Blue America is embracing the Trump cultural phenomenon, and like, look, when you win, you're hot. Like people want to be with the winner. I think there's a little bit of like this is kind of a great thing, but
because people on the left won't say things honestly, they're creating the space for people. I just spent 50 years in talk radio. I wasn't in talk radio because I was a right winger. I was in talk radio because we were allowed to talk about the stuff that the New York Times and NPR weren't going to talk about. And if once again, if Democrats lose the ability to close those gates and suddenly the average American's feelings are represented by just one party, even in blue spaces, how do you fight again? How do you get that moment back where you were the cool guys? All the cool people are saying what everyone knew all along. Democrats are proposing crazy crap. It's not crazy because it's Democrat. It's crazy because it's crazy.
Well, Trump said this on the trail at one point. He said, you know, it's not Republican, it's common sense. And he had a point. And because I think the left went so crazy that so much of what we were preaching actually just made sense to people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I just think part of the problem is the Democrats haven't wanted to answer questions.
Right.
To outside of their say, like, I totally agree with you. Meghan McCain said something earlier this week on social media about this. Like that, you know, part of the problem for Harris is she just didn't want to say.
Right.
And so you're right. You can't go give an interview if you don't want to talk.
And I'm going to put it on the record. Watch for the next 2 years the problem Democrats have with abortion, because we spent time in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire watching people trying to defend the Democrats' establishment position now, which is no limits at all. And they have the same problem that Republicans had with the transgender issue, where they were going out and telling people what Harris really said. And people said, oh, that can't be true. That's too crazy. When Democrats are forced in these upcoming debates to actually say, yeah, no limits, they're going to start paying prices and you're going to start seeing movement. That's my prediction.